Hi there, and welcome back to this workshop about Suzanne Ciani's Buchla Cookbook in VCV Rack. We have started to explore the different playing techniques. Let's continue our journey into the performance patch. Our fourth playing technique is the string patch. It can be heard on the 1975 Buchla concert album. Suzanne Ciani describes it as a patch that plays itself. It's worth mentioning that it was written at the dawn of generative music. It is indeed a unique type of generative technique, as it requires a very active behavior from the performer. The device decides of the direction, and the synthesist must follow it to adjust its choices. Most of the time, we are using the 248 to process the external sequences from the programmer. But for this patch, we will set the 248 in internal mode, so the pitch is set by the value of the stage. We can change this routing by the push of a button. For a more melodic result, we will set a scale on the quantizer, and we will start our patch with all stages to 0. This patch makes use of the frequency shifter that makes the two oscillators interacting with each other. This will produce a rich and harmonious tone when the two oscillators are well tuned together, and some extreme effects when they are detuned. This voice is sent to the filter bank to be shaped to your taste, and then to the low pass gate, modulated by a looping envelope. The patch requires a feature quite unique to the 248. Stages can be set to slope, which means that there is a glide effect between each value. The glide time can be set differently for each playhead, using the time multiplier knob. In other words, this setting creates an addressable, identical two-channel sequencer with a slightly different glide time for each playhead, and consequently for each oscillator. This means the two VCO will be slightly out of tune during the glide time, which creates highly inharmonic effects on the frequency shifter. But if the glide time is short enough, it can be used to emulate the harshness of a bow on a string instrument. The frequency shifter is sent to the fixed filter bank to be adjusted to taste. Now that we have our sound and our articulation, we will need the patch to play itself. We will address the two playheads with the same slow random voltage, sampled by the sequencer clock. Finding the right balance between the rate of change and the rate of sample will define the mood of the piece. And now, as the device is traveling along all its stages, we will follow it to set the notes we want. feel free to experiment with the octave switches on each playhead. So here it is, the string patch, completely different from the other patches, without changing a single cable. It's a fragile device that requires a lot of improvisation skill, like a tightrope walk between the performer and the machine. I can only recommend listening to the original version in the description for a more tasteful interpretation. The next patch is called keyboard rotation. This technique makes use of the manual keyboard to create a kind of modern counterpoint. Remember that our patch is connected to both the sequencer and the keyboard. It can be used to transpose a sequence, but here we will stop the sequencer at step 1, where all notes are in C. We will use only the keyboard and we will bring up our third oscillator. This patch takes advantage of the Buchla polyphonic sample and hold circuit. Only recently I found an audio example of this patch, and there is very few documentation about the original module. On the first thread, I assumed it was a 3-voice shift register where each value is shifted to the next oscillator. But it was before a few exchanges with Buchla users and other Cookbook investigators that I had the pleasure to meet thanks to this adventure. It appears to be a logic network that splits and distributes the notes to each voice, so they don't replicate at every trigger like in a classic shift register. I had to redesign the sample and hold section in order to achieve that. We will use the keyboard pitch information as a source to sample and send it to the 3 oscillators. We need to be able to switch between 1, 2 and 3 voices. Using the bug audio switch, we can send our trigger in different logic networks to sample the voltage from the keyboard. The first circuit is sending the same triggers to the 3 sample and holds, so all the oscillators are playing in unison. The second circuit is using an alternating switch to send one trigger to the first voice and the next trigger to the 2 other voices in unison. The melody feels already different, even though they are the exact same notes. The third circuit is using a 3-step sequencer to rotate the trigger between the 3 voices. This is interesting to point out that it is a 10-note melody. When set in 3 voices polyphony, the melody takes 30 notes to be resolved. We can go back to 2 voice or unison. We can expose each voice one at a time. We could stop there, but we have an entire system to interact with. Mrs. Ciani proposes some variation around this keyboard rotating concept. Our 248 is still active, even if it's not running. We can use it to set the wave shape and octave of voice 1 and 2. We can advance AFG2 to the next stage to have a separate control. We can then adjust its wave shape. We can set AFG1 to shift its voice 1 octave higher. As we have seen at the beginning of this patch, we can use the keyboard to transpose the sequencer, but we can also use the sequencer to transpose the keyboard melody. By selecting different sequences on the AFG, the voices can be moved separately by jumping from step to step on the sequencer. Once again, without changing a single patch cable, we have performed an entirely different playing technique, inspired both by technology and classical composition. The keyboard rotation, just another one of the many phases of the basic performance patch. Thank you for watching up to there. I will be happy to have you back in the next episode. Meanwhile, you will find many useful things in the description, including the VCV files, original recordings of the patches, the link to the cookbook, some interesting lecture from Suzanne Ciani, and the modular grid link to her former and current setup. Don't hesitate to subscribe for the next episode and share this if you know someone who might be interested. See you in the next episode.